U.S. Senate delegation arrives in North Sinai to inspect Rafah crossing and aid warehouses. European foreign ministers criticize U.S. for barring Abbas from attending UN General Assembly. And Iran's UN ambassador says Tehran will not negotiate under coercion, condemns EU's snapback sanctions move. These were the headlines, the news in detail. A U.S. Senate delegation has arrived at Al Arish International Airport in Egypt's North Sinai, aiming to inspect the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing and humanitarian aid warehouses. This visit underscores Egypt's intensified efforts to shape Gaza's post-war future, alongside its focus on reviving negotiations for a ceasefire and detainee release. The Senator's visit seeks to monitor Egypt's ongoing facilitation of aid entry into Gaza. That comes as Egypt remains steadfast in its solidarity with the Palestinians, emphasizing its readiness to allow thousands of aid trucks into Gaza once Israeli barriers are lifted, and highlighting its tireless humanitarian relief and medical support for Palestinians. Governor of North Sinai, Khaled Megawer, has affirmed that the Egyptian side of Rafah's border crossing is continuously open and that Egypt is fully ready to dispatch thousands of aid trucks once Israeli barriers are removed. That came as he spoke from Rafah, accompanied by a U.S. Senate delegation including Senators Chris Van Hollen and Jeff Merkley, who visited the Rafah border crossing and aid warehouses on the Egyptian side. Megawer emphasized Egypt's pursuit of a two-state solution amid urgent regional tensions requiring serious international intervention for lasting peace and security. He added that despite Israeli obstruction blocking aid entry, with over 5,000 trucks stalled and perishable supplies spoiling, in a clear demonstration of Egypt's relentless efforts to ease Gaza's humanitarian crisis, the governor of North Sinai stated that Egypt continues providing medical care for evacuees. The U.S. delegation, UN ceasefire monitors, and embassy officials aimed to review Egypt's ongoing humanitarian relief and medical support for Palestinians, underscoring deep solidarity with the Palestinians. Aid delivery to Gaza faces major hurdles, including Israeli inspections, restricted crossings, security threats, and damaged infrastructure, worsening humanitarian needs. The U.S. Senate delegation has visited the Egyptian Red Crescent's logistics center to inspect ongoing humanitarian aid operations. During their visit, North Sinai Governor Khaled Migawer reaffirmed Egypt's unwavering commitment to delivering continuous assistance to Gaza, emphasizing the country's determination to support the Palestinians despite ongoing challenges. The visit highlights the cooperation between U.S. and Egyptian officials in addressing urgent humanitarian needs in the region. U.S. senators visited Egypt's Rafah border crossing, inspecting aid efforts and discussing ongoing challenges limiting humanitarian supplies reaching Gaza. Five Democratic U.S. senators have urged U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio to enable an immediate massive surge of baby formula and humanitarian aid to Gaza, where infants are dying from starvation amid an escalating famine. Led by Ruben Gallego, the letter highlights over 300 hunger-related deaths, including 119 children since October 2023. The senators emphasized that malnourished mothers cannot breastfeed, making formula vital for infant survival. The appeal comes as Israel announced it will no longer pause fighting to permit aid deliveries, worsening the crisis. The letter demands reopening all Gaza crossings and drastically increasing aid access, stressing the U.S. moral obligation. This call follows similar appeals from House Democrats and reflects growing public support for urgent humanitarian intervention in Gaza. European foreign ministers criticized Washington for barring Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas from attending next month's UN General Assembly. European foreign ministers arriving for an EU meeting in Copenhagen sharply criticized the US decision to deny a visa to Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Spain's foreign minister José Manuel Albares called the move unacceptable, while Ireland's Simon Harris urged the EU to protest in the strongest possible terms. France's Jean-Noël Barrot stressed that no restrictions should apply to the UN General Assembly. Abbas, along with about 80 other Palestinian officials, were barred under a U.S. measure affecting the Palestine Liberation Organization and Palestinian Authority. Abbas has planned to attend high-level meetings where several countries were expected to pledge recognition of a Palestinian state. Palestinians in Gaza City held funerals at Al-Shifa Hospital on Saturday for victims of Israeli strikes and others killed while seeking aid. Among them was 14-year-old Yazan Tolan, described as his family's sole breadwinner. Wida Tolan, Yazan's aunt, said he was shot dead at Zakim while trying to collect aid. Wafa reported 5 more killed in southern and central Gaza, while 22 others were killed in separate Israeli shelling across the Strip. The Israeli military announced it had recovered the body of hostage Ilan while ending a pause in operations around Gaza City. UNRWA says its warehouses in Egypt and Jordan are full and ready to dispatch 6,000 trucks of humanitarian aid to Gaza once Israeli restrictions are lifted. The UN agency UNRWA confirmed that its warehouses in Egypt and Jordan are prepared to load around 6,000 trucks of aid for Gaza. The agency called for the lifting of Israeli restrictions blocking entry of humanitarian supplies, emphasizing it has an effective system to distribute aid safely and widely. UNRWA stressed the urgent need to allow life-saving assistance to reach Palestinians via land routes. Spanish Foreign Minister José Manuel Alvarez has urged Europe to take decisive action regarding Palestine amid the catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where thousands of children are dying from hunger due to the Israeli blockade. Alvarez called for an immediate arms embargo on Israel and expanded sanctions against those obstructing the two-state solution. He emphasized Spain's readiness to lead a renewed European wave of recognition for the Palestinian state. Alvarez also demanded the suspension of the partnership agreement with Israel as a form of pressure. Furthermore, he expressed strong support for convening a United Nations conference dedicated to implementing the two-state solution, highlighting the urgency of coordinated international efforts to resolve the conflict and alleviate the suffering of the Palestinians.
So I think that this agreement has been made by all parties, has been made thinking about the people, about the well-being of the people, specifically on those 15,000, but also...
Gaza-based health authorities have announced that the death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip has climbed to over 63,300 and over 159,800 other wounded. Gaza-based health authorities have reported that Israeli military operations in Gaza had killed 66 Palestinians and injured more than 345 others only in the past 24 hours. Tens of thousands of Yemenis rallied in Sana'a and Houthi-held areas to protest Israeli strikes and show solidarity with Palestinians. Demonstrators waved Palestinian flags and condemned Israeli airstrikes, blockade, and annexation attempts. They said Gaza faces slaughter, hunger, and displacement while the West Bank remains under threat. Houthi armed units also joined the protests, which drew international attention and echoed UN criticism of Israeli actions. Iran's UN ambassador says the country will not negotiate under coercion, condemning the EU's snapback sanction move. Iran's permanent representative to the UN, Amir Saeed Irbani, condemned Britain, France, and Germany for triggering the snapback mechanism to potentially reinstate UN sanctions in 30 days. Speaking to reporters at the Security Council, Irbani called the move unlawful and politically motivated and emphasized that Iran will not enter negotiations under threats or coercion. The snapback clause comes from the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, allowing sanctions to be reinstated if Iran violates the agreement. Former Ukrainian parliamentary speaker Andrei Baruby was shot dead in Lviv, with authorities launching a manhunt for the assailant. Andrei Baruby, 54, former Speaker of Ukraine's parliament and ex-secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, was shot dead on Saturday in Lviv. Prosecutors said a gunman opened fire, killing Baruby on the spot before fleeing. Baruby was a prominent figure in the 2013-2014 Euromaidan protests and had played key roles during Russia's annexation of Crimea and the early conflict in eastern Ukraine. Authorities have not yet indicated any direct link between the murder and Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said Russia will only end its war in Ukraine when it cannot continue militarily or economically.
Wir bemühen uns intensivst auf allen Wegen, bis wir nicht gemeinsam dafür gesorgt haben, dass Russland diesen Krieg zumindest aus wirtschaftlichen Gründen, vielleicht auch aus militärischen Gründen, jedenfalls aus wirtschaftlichen Gründen,
EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas says frozen Russian assets will not be returned unless Moscow pays reparations for the war in Ukraine. Speaking ahead of an EU foreign ministers meeting in Copenhagen, Kallas said it was unthinkable to hand back the assets without compensation. The EU has frozen around 210 billion euros, or about $246 billion, under sanctions. Ukraine and several member states want the fund used to support Kiev. Russia's top general says forces are pressing non-stop offensives across Ukraine, claiming major territorial control. Valery Karazimov said Moscow controls nearly all of Luhansk, most of Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions. He added Russian forces have captured 3,500 square kilometers and 149 villages since March. Fighting remains intense along the entire front line.
В настоящее время нашими вооруженными силами освобождено 99,7 территории Луганской.
Russia says its forces seized 6 more settlements in Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk as Ukraine reports troop build-up near Pokrovsk. Moscow's defense ministry said the gains were made between August 23rd and 29th, adding that its forces launched 7 strikes on Ukrainian facilities, bases and depots. Ukraine's military reported a strike on a Russian fuel station in Bryansk, supplying frontline troops. A Russian strike on Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia killed 1 person and injured 24, including 3 children, according to local authorities. Governor Ivan Vedrov said 14 residential buildings were damaged, cutting power and gas supplies. President Vladimir Zelensky accused Moscow of using diplomatic preparations as cover for fresh attacks. Ukraine Air Force says it intercepted 510 drones and 38 missiles in a massive overnight Russian attack. Officials reported 5 missiles and 24 drone strikes at 7 sites, with debris falling on 21 others. Kiev sustained no damage as air defense intercepted incoming drones. The assault came a day after a Russian strike on the capital killed 25 people. Ukraine Prime Minister Yulia Sverdinko has urged the UN Security Council to provide more air defense systems after deadly Russian strikes. Sverdinko said Ukraine also needs long-range strike capabilities to neutralize Russia-launched sites. Thursday, attacks left 25 dead and 63 injured, with images of victims shown to council members. She called for urgent international action to protect Ukrainian cities. Chinese President Xi Jinping met Egyptian Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli in Tianjin ahead of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit. Xi called for deeper bilateral ties as both nations mark 70 years of diplomatic relations in 2026. He urged alignment of China's Belt and Road Initiative with Egypt's Vision 2030, stressing cooperation in trade, manufacturing and energy while pledging joint effort to support global peace and development. Three people died and 5 were injured after protesters set fire to a regional parliament building in Indonesia. Officials said the blaze broke out Friday night in Makassar, South Sulawesi, amid protests over lawmakers' pay. Antara news agency said the victims were likely trapped inside, while 2 of the injured jumped from the building. The unrest marks the first major test for President Prabowo Subianto's government. Pakistan has evacuated over 1 million people from flood-hit Punjab province as overflowing rivers threaten major cities. Officials say flooding worsened after India suspended a decade-old river treaty and gates on an Indian barrage collapsed. Water have reached Lahore's outskirts and threatened hung in the region's worst flooding in nearly 40 years. Islamabad denies New Delhi's claims of militant backing linked to the dispute. Heavy rains triggered flooding and landslides in northern India, washing away homes and trapping residents under debris. Rescue teams are working to free up to 9 people trapped after a landslide in Rudraprayag. Torrential monsoon rains have devastated parts of India and neighboring Pakistan, with more downpours expected through the week. end. As Shanghai endures a record-breaking heat wave, locals are flocking to the L plus Snow indoor skiing theme resort to cool off. Spanning over 98,000 square meters, L plus Snow holds the Guinness World Record as the world's largest indoor ski facility. Visitors enjoy downhill skiing, snowboarding, ice cycling, and snowball fights, with slopes scattering to all skill levels. The complex can host over 1,100 people at a time. Shanghai issued an orange heat alert on Thursday as the city hits its 23rd consecutive day of 35 degrees Celsius temperatures, the longest streak on record. In Argentina, 5 cloned fools edited with CRISPR technology, or the CRISPR technology, are stirring controversy. Polo authorities are blocking their entry into the sport, ethical concerns over genetic engineering. The foals created by Qnews Biotech are the world's first genetically edited horses designed for enhanced speed by reducing a muscle-limiting gene. While cloning is widely accepted in Argentina's polo industry, gene editing has met resistance. The Argentine Polo Association has banned GE horses from competition, and breeders warn the practice could threaten traditional breeding. Authorities say a decision on registration may take years. Revelers were drenched in tomato puree as Spain's famous food fight festival, La Tomatina, took over the streets. The chaotic one-hour event saw participants throw thousands of tomatoes at each other, turning the town into a sea of red. Originating from a spontaneous village scuffle in 1945, Tomatina was banned during the 1950s under General Francesco Franco dictatorship, but revived in the 1980s to become a major international attraction, drawing visitors from across Spain and the whole world. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we've been covering. U.S. Senate delegation arrives in North Sinai to inspect Rafah crossing and aid warehouses. European foreign ministers criticize U.S. for barring Abbas from attending UN General Assembly. And Iran's UN ambassador says Tehran will not negotiate under coercion, condemns EU snapback sanctions move. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok, Qnews EGY, to stay informed. Many thanks for watching, and good night.